The world out there is huge, but somehow we only ever see a small part of it. Have you ever wondered, what if we put all of our little observations together? What kind of picture would that create? I'm Javi, and you're listening to From Mind to Mic. This is a space where young voices are heard, honestly, openly, and without judgment. So grab your headphones, get comfortable, and come with us as we explore the rhythm of the society through the eyes of our generations. Let's get started. We are told that to be heard, we need to be louder. We are told that to be persuasive, we need to be more charisma. But today, the rapidly changing digital age is changing that forever. In a world saturated with instant answers and information generated by artificial intelligence, speaking louder isn't so important anymore, but to be more concise and logical with your reasonings. So, how do we still have excellent critical thinking ability these days when AI is dominating? Today's guests have practically mastered this art. From the podium of TEDx and the intense battlegrounds of the World Scholar Cup, she knows exactly what it takes to make arguments persuasive and convincing. Welcome to today's episode, 𝐿𝐻𝐻. Let us hear a little bit about yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is 𝐿𝐻𝐻, and I'm currently a student at 𝐬𝐻𝐻 High School for the Gifted. I was Secretary General at 𝐬𝐻𝐻 2026 and used to be a TEDx speaker on three stage. I used to win some of the public speaking contests and also be at some debate competitions. Through my journey in debate, Model United Nations, and public speaking, I gradually realized that critical thinking is not just an academic skill reserved for competitions or conference rooms. More importantly, it's a way for us to understand the world, navigate different perspectives, and make decisions in our everyday life. I'm truly excited to be here today's postcard to talk about critical thinking, logic, and my personal experience behind every environment that often seem to revolve only around competitions and argumentations. I hope these conversations will not only offer new perspective, but also show that critical thinking is actually far more humans and relatable than many people think.
Thank you, 𝐿𝐻𝐻. To be honest, you achieved so much in the realm of public speaking, but I want to peel back the layers a bit and look back at the process. You won the second prize at the start of public speaking contest and took the stage as a TEDx Dragon Bridge speaker. Many people think public speaking is just about the charisma, a loud voice, and also confident. But in fact, there's more hidden work behind that. Critical thinking plays a very essential role, as you already mentioned before, to attention-grabbing remarks as well. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is critical thinking and structural logic?
I would honestly put it at 9 per 10. Not because charisma and confidence are important, but because without critical thinking and structural logic, even the most energetic speech quickly become forgettable. Public speaking is often mistaken for performance alone. People notice the voice, maybe the gesture, eye contact, and confident at first. But what truly make an audience stay engaged is the speaker's ability to build ideas clearly, connect evidence logically, and guide listener toward the meaningful conclusions. That invisible architecture is critical thinking. For me, critical thinking matters in public speaking for some major reasons. First is give the speeches depth instead of decorations. A confident speaker can sound impressive for a few minutes, but audiences eventually ask themselves, does this argument actually make sense? Critical thinking allows a speaker to analyze issues from multiple perspectives, maybe identify contradictions and avoid simplified claims. It also creates coherence and persuasions as well. Structural logic is what turns separate ideas into a compelling narrative. A strong speech is not just a collection of beautiful sentences, it's a careful connected chain where each point naturally leads to the next. Without logic, even the most emotional speeches lose impact because audience cannot follow the reasoning. And the final reasons I think is that it helps speaker adapt under pressure. In debate or maybe Q&A questions or impromptu speak, memorized charisma is not enough. Critical thinking allows people to process new information quickly, respond thoughtfully, and defend their stance with clarity rather than panic. So, ironically, the more polished a speech appears, the more invisible the critical thinking behind it often becomes. Audience see the spotlight in the moment, but if they do not they do not always see the hours spending like maybe researching, organizing arguments, and maybe questioning some assumptions as well. So confidence may capture the tensions initially, but critical thinking is what gives a speech credibility, substance, and lasting influence.
I love how you make critical thinking sound like the backbone of a great presentation and speech, but applying that logic and skills in real time is challenging to most people. It makes me wonder, what is the secret to taking a massive, complex global issue and critically breaking it down into a simple 10-minute speech that makes an everyday listener completely change their mind?
Okay, that's a very, interesting question. The secret is realizing that people rarely change their minds because of more information. They change their mind when a speaker makes a complicated issues feel human, understandable, and personally relevant, which is relatable. When preparing a 10-minute speech on a massive global issue, the goal is not to explain everything because that is impossible. I cannot try to explain everything on a technical stage or on my debate for a lot of arguments. The goal is to guide the audience through one clear intellectual journey. So there is some powerful approach that I get from my experience in MUMs and also debating, and it's usually look like this. First, you should shrink the issue before expanding it. Most speakers fail because they try to cover entire crisis at once, like climate change, armed trafficking, AI ethics, or maybe like poverty. Those topics are too broad for human intentions. Instead, you should find one contradictions or maybe an overlooked perspective or some central questions. I will give an example for you. Instead of saying climate change is dangerous, you should ask instead, why do people understand climate change still struggle to act? A narrow lens make global issue emotionally and intellectually accessible. The second tips that I get from those experience is that you should build around a single core message. If the audience forgets everything except one sentence, what should it be? This technique is usually used on my TEDx stage with like a memorable sentence. A great speeches are usually built around one central thesis repeated in different form. Everything like statistic, story, humor, and example, they just exist only to reinforce that message. Maybe a confused speech often has too many good ideas competing for an attention. So that's a reason why I think you guys should build around just a single core message so that everybody could understand it. And I think that you can turn abstractions into humanity. The human brain struggle to emotionally process huge number like million displays billions dollars and some statistic about global temperature increases, but they will remember the story of a child, the moment, and the personal dilemma. That is why storytelling is so powerful. A single concrete story can represent an entire global system more effectively than 10 statistic maybe. And you can use logic like a staircase. A persuasive speech should feel inevitable. Each idea should naturally lead to the next. Like you should first establish the problem, challenge assumptions, or maybe introduce some evidence, some consequences, and frame perspective. If the audience has to mentally jump between the idea and persuasion's beacons, good speakers do not overwhelm listener with intelligence. They guide them step by step. And the last thing that I have is like a technique for most of me on a stage for public speaking is that you should end with reframing, not just emotions. A standing ovations is not always a changed mind. Real persuasions happen when audience live seeing the issue differently than before. The ending should therefore offer a new lens, a shift in perspective that lingers after the speech is ends. So, the best speeches, in my idea, do not merely answering the questions. They permanently change the questions the audience asks themselves.
That is a brilliant framework, and it is very insightful how you frame the debate as something more relatable to the audience in order for them to change their mind. So, talking about your experience as the Secretary General of MUN, you have operated in environments where arguments fly at lightning speed. So, when you are in the heat of a debate round, how do you keep your emotions from hijacking your critical thinking ability?
Okay, so in fast paced debate environments, emotion never fully disappear. Honestly, they should not. Passion gives speeches energy and conviction. The challenge is preventing emotion from controlling decision making. What helped me most is treating debate less like a personal confrontations and more like a problem solving exercise. The moment I start viewing attacks on my arguments as attacks on me, my thinking become defensive instead of analytical. So when I mentally separate my identity from my stance, I can evaluate argument much more objectively. Another important habit that I trying to exercise is focus on structure rather than panic. In intense rounds, information move quickly. That emotion often come from feelings of overwhelm by maybe your components, your objective view also. So instead of reacting immediately, I instinctively reduce everything into a few core questions. What is their main claim? What assumptions support it? Where is the logical gap? Maybe which clash actually matter most to the church? That process create mental stability. It turned chaos into something that is manageable, in my opinions. I also think preparations play a larger role than people realize. Critical thinking under pressure is not purely spontaneous talent, it is trained with familiarity. After enough debate, you should begin recognizing recurring pattern in argument, policies, and radical tactics. That experience reduces emotional shock because your brain spent less energy processing the situations and more energy analyzing it. At the same time, I think emotional control does not mean like you should become robotic or like trying to be ChatGPT to explain everything that is logical. Some of the strongest debater are emotionally expressive, but strategically so. The key is ensuring emotions support logic rather than replace it. So confidence should reinforce reasoning, not cover weak analysis. Perhaps most importantly, I remind myself that winning a debate is not the same as defeating someone, which people have a lot of misconceptions about it. Debate, model UNs, and also public speaking are ultimately intellectual collaborations where opposing side pressures text idea. That mindset make it easier to stay calm. You listen to your opponents carefully, respectfully, and think critically, even in the highly competitive moments.
Talking about the emotions in the debate, so does the experience make you more empathetic or more skeptical when you have to train your brain to defend a side in a debate?
Well, it's tough for me to choose between both, so I think I would choose both. I think it's made me empathic and more skeptical also, but I guess in a constructive way. Debate trains you to realize that intelligent people can arrive at completely different conclusion while still using logic, evidence, and good intentions. When you experience that repeatedly, it becomes much harder to reduce like disagreement to right versus wrong or like good versus bad. You begin to see how culture, experience, incentive, fear, and value shape the way people think. That naturally built empathy because you learn to understand why some people believe something, not just what they believe. At the same time, they also make you feel more skeptical of like some oversimplified narrative, including your own also. When you constantly practice in defending both sides of an issue, you become aware of how easily statistic, emotional appeal, and rhetoric can frame to support different conclusions. You stop accepting argument at face value simply because they sound confident or emotionally compelling. Ironically, debate teaches me that humility more than certainty. The more perspective you encounter, the more you realize how complex most global issues actually are. In some platform, like maybe Model United UNs or Word Scholar Cup discussions, for example, I've seen how policy that seem ideal in theory can create unintended consequences in practice. I can give some example. It's kind of long, so I will not give it here. But you can see that it's given me the impressions that how nations often make decisions under constraints that outsider never fully see it. Overall, debate has changed my work will by making me slower to judge and more willing to question first impressions. It taught me that critical thinking is not just about dismantling arguments, it's about understanding people. The strongest thinkers are not those who stubbornly defend one perspective forever, but those who can examine idea rigorously while still remaining intellectual open minded.
That is actually a very profound way to look at debate. So it shows that debate isn't just about winning points. It actually expands your capacity to understand the human nature from multiple perspectives. And speaking of navigating different perspectives on a global scale, you represented Vietnam in the Youth Leadership Program in Washington, D.C. So when you interact with youth leaders from entirely different political, cultural, and educational systems, how does critical thinking help bridge the gap? Did you notice a difference in how American youth versus Vietnamese youth approaching problem solving?
Representing Vietnam in the ODYP was one of the experiences that mostly deeply changed the way I view communication and leadership as well. When young people from different systems come together, critical thinking becomes essential because assumptions that feel obvious in one culture may not feel obvious at all in another. I realized that critical thinking is not just about analyzing argument logically, as I said before. It is about recognizing the limit of your own perspective. In international discussions, especially on topics like education's civic engagement, inequality, maybe social issues, people often approach problems through the lens of their national experience. Without critical thinking, conversations can easily become defensive or judgmental. With it, you can start asking instead, why do they see the issue that way? What contexts that shape their perspective? What constraints or priorities that am I overlooking? That might help bridge gaps because people feel hurt rather than challenged. One thing I particularly noticed was a difference in communication styles and problem solving approach between Americans and Vietnamese students. Though, of course, there are always some exceptions anyway. Many American youth I met tended to approach problems very directly and individually. They were often encouraged to voice opinions open, challenge system confidently, and propose bold solutions quickly. That they are very confident, and they prioritize individualisms. Their education's environment seemed to emphasize initiative, discussions, and self-expressions from a very young age. So they were generally very comfortable to speak up, even when their ideas were unfinished or not polished at all. But as a Vietnamese youth, on the other hand, I can often see that they are approach those issues more cautiously and collectively. I noticed we tended to spend more time observing, analyzing context, and considering harmony within the group before representing conclusions. In some cases, Vietnamese students were less immediately vocal, but when they contribute, their points were often highly thoughtful and carefully structured. Neither approach is inherently better. In fact, interacting with both styles showed me the strengths and weaknesses of each. Fast, confident problem solving can generate innovations and momentum, but slower, more reflective analysis can prevent oversight and encourage nuance. What fascinated me most was that despite the differences, many of us ultimately care about the same thing. We care about opportunity, fairness, communities, and also meaningful impact as well. Critical thinking help uncover that common ground. It allows conversation to move beyond stereotype and toward genuine understanding. So at the end of the day, I think international leadership experiences teach you that intelligence is expressed differently across culture. Some people think out loud, others think quietly before speaking, maybe. Some prioritize efficiency, others prioritize balance. Critical thinking helps you navigate those differences with curiosity instead of assumptions.
Thank you for the fascinating insights on the differences between Vietnamese debaters and American debaters. And let's bring it back to the ground for a moment. When we strip away from the formal structures, the timers, and the podiums, what would you say are the fundamental similarities between critical thinking in conventional, everyday life versus the high level academic environment like debate or MUN?
Well, at their core, critical thinking in everyday life and in high level academic environments are actually driven by the same fundamental skill, the ability to pause between reactions and judgments. In debate tournament or academic discussions, that process look formalized. There are speeches, rebuttal, evidence, timers, and maybe structured argumentations. But outside those settings, people still constantly interpret informations, weigh competing perspectives, make decisions, and maybe justify belief in the less obvious way that you cannot see through your eyes, maybe. The same core habit exists in both environments is that you should distinguishing evidence from your emotion. You can recognizing assumptions and identifying some bias, evaluating consequences as well. You can also ask whether a conclusion truly follow from the reasoning behind it. For example, in debate, you might analyze a policy proposal. In everyday life, you might evaluate a viral social media post, a friendship conflict, a career decisions, or maybe even your own insecurity. The context changes, but the mental process remains surprisingly familiar. One familiarity I find especially important is that both form of critical thinking requires intellectual humility. In competitive debates, strong debater maybe they know they can be wrong, miss nuances, or maybe they can encounter stronger arguments. In ordinary life, the same humility matter because reality is rarely as simple as our first impressions. People who think critically are often willing to revise their view when presented with better reasoning or new experiences. Another shared element, I guess, is the emotional management. People sometimes imagine critical thinking as cold or emotionless, but emotion influences decision making everywhere. Like I have talked before you about how emotions like support your arguments and debating. I think both environments reveal that communication matter just as much as intelligence. A brilliant idea explained poorly, it can fail in debate chamber and in real life alike. Critical thinker therefore not need only the analytical ability, but also clarity, empathy, and awareness of their own audience as well. Ultimately, the debate simply magnifies and accelerates processes that already exist in everyday life. In that sense, I guess critical thinking is not merely an academic skill that many people think. It is a life skill that shape how we understand the world, other people, and even ourselves as well.
So, just curious. So, out of the formal and academic environments like debate and MUN, so how do we adapt our skills to make critical thinking actually works in realistic everyday situations when people's feelings and egos are heavily involved, I bet that they will not understand that they will have to debate around emotion, right?
Yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions about critical thinking is that it's purely about being logically. In reality, critical thinking becomes truly effective only when it's understand human emotion as a part of equation rather than as an obstacle to eliminate, like many people say. In everyday situations, people are rarely debating as a detached intellectual. They are protecting identities, experiences, their value, their pride, and their emotion as well. That's me. Applying critical thinking in real life requires emotional intelligence just as much as analytical ability. The first adaptation is learning that being correct is not always the same as being persuasive. In debating setting, exposing flaws directly may earn your points, but in personal or professional situations, making some people feel embarrassed, dismissed, or attacked often cause them to define themselves more strongly, or even when your reasoning is maybe valid. So, effective critical thinking in real life starts with listening before analyzing. Instead of immediately searching for counter arguments, I think you should ask this instead. How does this matter so much to them? What fear, experience, or value is shaping this reaction also? When you understand the emotional layer, your reasoning becomes far more constructive. Another important adaptation is replacing the mindset of winning with the mindset of understanding. As I've said before, everyday conversations are not formal competitions with judges and ballots so trying to be chill. If critical thinking is used to only prove you're like you superior than other, it can quickly become performative and even alienating. But when it is used to clarify misunderstanding and search for better solutions together, people become more open to dialogue. I think tones matter enormously. The same arguments can feel collaborative or confrontational depends on your delivery. People are much more receptive when they feel like they are respects. Sometimes can phrase like, I might be wrong, but like I understand what you think. Like, can we look at another's perspective? Far more effective than aggressively asserting solutions, even if underlying logic is identical. Another challenge is recognizing that humans are not a perfect they are not perfectly rational as you think, including also bias, ego, stress, and insecure, and also social pressures influence everyone thinking. Real world critical thinking therefore requires self awareness. Am I reacting emotionally right now? That level of reflection is often harder than analyzing other people's argument. In the end, I think the goal is to make critical thinking feel human rather than mechanical. The strongest thinker are not those who try to destroy others intellectually, but those who can combine logic with empathy. In real life, people rarely remember who had the sharpest rebuttal. They just remember somebody who make them feel heard, but while still helping to make them see like something different. Like, as you say, you look so intelligent, you look so smart, but you make me feel so comfortable and listen to you because you don't try to overwhelm me with those knowledge and arguments. So that is the best solutions.
Thank you for pointing out that critical thinking is also about the emotions as well, and not always about the logic behind it. I think that many people also have this very common misconception about effective critical thinking as well. And for someone with a brain as trained in logic as yours, do you find yourself over analyzing everyday life choices, like what to eat or what to wear, because your brain is constantly running on critical thinking mode?
Definitely sometimes. Although not always in the traumatic way, like especially for practice choices, the way that people imagine. I think when you spend years training your brains in debate, leadership, and analytical environments, you naturally become more aware of the trade off in everyday decisions. Even small choices can unconsciously turn into questions like What is the most efficient options? What is impressions does it create for everybody's? What are the possible consequences? Maybe. So yes, there are moments where my brain starts constructing many pros and cons analysis for things that probably do not require that much thought. But interestingly, debate and critical thinking also taught me the limits of overanalysis. Logic is useful, but everyday life is not an optimization's context. Sometimes there is no objective perfect decisions, only the decisions that reflect your priorities, maybe your emotions or your current needs. I think highly analytical people often struggle because they assume every choice must be maximized. Yet in reality, constantly seeking the best possible answer can become mentally exhausting, I guess, and even counterproductive. At some point, critical thinking also means recognizing when additional analysis no longer meaningful improve the outcome. So over time, I just learned to separate the decisions that genuinely deserve deep analysis from the decision where intuitions, preference, and spontaneity are enough. Just follow your intuitions, whatever. For example, when handling leadership responsibility, international programs, or maybe high stake debate, structured thinking matters enormously because consequences ripple the outworlds. But for smaller choices, what you music you're listening to, what cafe to visit, what outfit feel comfortable, whatever. Sometimes the how you think is simply allowing yourself to choose without turning life into a constant evaluations round. Ironically, one of the most valuable lessons that critical taught me is was human are not machines designed purely for efficiency. The creativities, curiosities, and randomness are also part of good decision making. I think so. A perfect rational life is not necessarily a meaningful one.
I love your honesty, and it's incredibly reassuring to know that even a skilled debater also gets stuck over simple lifestyle choices. It makes you incredibly relatable. And looking back at your profile, TEDx World Scholar Cup Secretary General, what is something you wish you had started earlier to develop your critical thinking skills, specifically for everyday life, outside of formal competitions?
Um, to be to be honest, it's like a very long process that I cannot clearly explain it at a certain stage in life. I wish I had honestly, I wish I had started practicing reflection earlier, not just like argumentations, which make me sometimes become a kind of quarrelsome people. Formal competitions train you to think fast, maybe defend positions, identity flaws, and construct logic under pressure. Those skills are incredibly valuable, but everyday life often demands a quieter form of critical thinking. Think it subconsciously. The ability to reflect your own emotions, habits, your toxic relationship, and motivation with honesty. For a long time, I associate strong thinking with having good answer. But outside competitions, I gradually realized that many important life situations are less about producing the smart arguments and more about asking yourself some uncomfortable questions to reflect. Like, why did that comment affect me so much? Uh, am I actually making the decisions for myself or just like external validations? Do I truly believe this? Or have I just repeated long enough to feel attached to this? I think I would have benefited from learning earlier that critical thinking should also be inward facing, not just only outward facing. Another thing I wish I had practiced earlier in learning is learning how to sit with uncertainty and insecurity. Competitive environments often reward your confidence, decisiveness, and clear conclusions, but real life is much messier. It is a mess. Sometimes there is incomplete information, conflicting emotions, so no perfect answer at all. Younger me often feel pressure to figure everything out logically, when in reality, majority sometimes mean tolerating the ambiguity without rushing to force the certainty. I also wish I had learned earlier that listening is a part of critical thinking. In debate, as I've taught you before, you should be a good listener before being a good debater. In debate, listening is strategic. You listen to the response. In everyday life, people sometimes need to be listened without immediate being analyzed or corrected. That's so rude, I guess. Understanding another person's emotionally can matter just as much as evaluating whether their reasoning is technically flawless. And perhaps the most importantly, I wish that I understood sooner that critical thinking is not meant to detach you from humanity. Sometimes highly analytical people intentionally intellectualize everything, maybe stress, failure, and even their happiness. But not every experience need to become a case study, We just enjoy that emotion at that time. Some moments are meant to be felt before they're dissected. So if I could go back, I would think I would still train my logic and structure and argumentation intensely, but I would spend more time to develop the self-awareness, emotional reflections, and the ability to understand people and feel empathize. Because in everyday life, the most meaningful form of critical thinking is not winning discussions, it's understand yourself and other more truthfully.
That is such a powerful piece of self-reflection. It shows area where you wanted to ground yourself further, such as being an active listener. As we start to wrap up this incredible conversation, I want to leave our audience with something actionable. So if you could give the listeners today just one or two mental habit or exercise that they can practice every day to radically sharpen their critical thinking, what would it be?
Oh, I have this technique. If it could be, I just recommend just one habit. It would be this: practicing asking yourself, what if I'm wrong? Genuinely, not rhetorically. That single question sounds simple, but it fundamentally changes the way you process information, arguments, and even your own emotions. Don't be so egocentric. You should stay in open mind to think, what if I'm wrong? Most people do not lack intelligence, they lack intellectual interruptions. The human brain naturally searches for evidence that confirms what is already believed, which is like confirmation bias, the term of confirmation bias. We defend opinions instinctively because the beliefs are often tied to identity, your pride, your ego, comfort, and the sense of belonging. But the moments you intentionally consider the possibilities that your perspective may be incomplete and not polished, your thinking becomes far more flexible and accurate. This habit can be practiced everywhere when you practice news, your arguments with your friends, just like when you gossip, when you trying to chat with your friends, or maybe scrolling social media, which is important to need to have critical thinking. Don't try to making assumptions about someone at the first time based on your intuitions, even when you're criticizing yourself, also criticizing your failure, your bad emotions, just trying to ask yourself why you think that. Was it worth it? The exercise is not about becoming indecisive or doubting in every day endlessly. I've told you before, sometimes you can be chill and intuitive. It is about creating a small mental pause before certainty takes over. A practical version will look like this. Notice your immediate conclusions. You can ask yourself, have you ever seen any evidence support this claim? What evidence challenges, or how would someone intelligent disagree with me? Then force yourself to articulate the opposing perspective fairly, not sarcastically. The final step is especially powerful. If you cannot explain the opposing side accurately and respectfully, you probably do not fully understand the issue yet. What makes this habit transformative is that it's improved not just only analytical thinking, but it's also empathy, your decision making abilities, and your emotions majority. You become less reactive, less repulsive, less manipulated by sensationalism, and more capable of understanding the complexity, the nuance between everything around, behind everything. So I guess the strongest critical thinkers are often not the people most obsessed with being right. They are people willing to examine why they believe and why they believe that they are right at the first place.
Thank you for sharing your special and one-of-a-kind technique with us. Listeners, this is also a sign from 𝐻𝐻 for you to back off from being an egoist and question yourself. What if I'm wrong? And what an incredible journey this conversation has been. You show us that real persuasion isn't about overpowering someone else, it's about the framing. A great speaker doesn't just talk, they act as a guide, leading the audience naturally from one step to the next, like walking up a staircase of logic. And I love the nuance you brought up to the world of the competitive debate and MUN. It's so easy for people to view the massive global issues through their own lens, but you reminded us that every country operates under hidden, systematic constraints that outsiders can't completely see. It's fascinating how that realization creates a beautiful irony. It teaches you to both deeply skeptical and profoundly empathetic at the same time. Thank you for your time with us today. This brings us to the close of our discussion. Thanks for staying and for sharing this moment with us. Whether you're heading to sleep or stepping into a new day, I hope you carry this with you, the reminder that your voice matters and it always has a place somewhere. Find the mic, unmute the real you. I'm Javi, and this is From Mind to Mic. See you in the next episode.